So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Kim Young-gil in Seoul. Let's first get started with a look at today's highlights. China and Korea's swap deal worth some $56 billion is set to expire on Tuesday, with the issue widely seen as a litmus test for bilateral relations. Washington's latest trade measures are ramping up pressure on Korea as the Trump administration seeks to amend a trade deal it says is unfavorable to American businesses and workers. These stories and more coming right up. We begin with our top story. Uncertainty is still hanging in the air as a $56 billion currency swap deal between Korea and China expires today after 7 years in effect. Negotiations for its renewal have been ongoing for days, but with the deadline inching closer, still no word on whether a new deal will be struck. Our Park Hee-jun starts us off.
The currency swap agreement between the Bank of Korea and the People's Bank of China is due to expire on Tuesday, October 10th, and the prospects of an extension still remain uncertain. The agreement, worth $56 billion has been in effect for 7 years since 2008 to guard against market volatility in the wake of the global financial crisis. The deal was extended twice since it first came into effect, with the last one coming 3 years ago in 2014. Possibilities of an extension remain low due to the ongoing diplomatic row between the two countries over Korea's decision to deploy a THAAD anti-missile battery. Beijing's government has imposed unofficial economic sanctions in response, targeting major Korean companies including Lotte and Hyundai Motors. But according to a government source on Monday, negotiations between the two governments are nearly finished, awaiting the final word from their respective leaders. It is likely that there will be a third currency swap agreement, and the two sides will continue to discuss final procedures concerning the deal. If the two countries fail to agree on an extension, analysts say it will be a loss for both sides. Korea could find itself more vulnerable to financial market turmoil, as its agreement with Beijing accounts for almost 46% of the total swap deals it has with other countries. If the agreement expires for good, Korea will have no other currency swaps with major economies, including the United States and Japan. It is also likely that Korea's financial market and credit ratings will be hurt. For China, its efforts to make the yuan one of the key international currencies could be negatively affected. Park Hee-jun, Business Daily.
Korean exports have been gradually recovering in recent months, but its proportion in the Chinese market, however, has dipped below the 10% mark so far this year. Data shows that Korea's outbound shipments to China accounted for 9.4% of Beijing's total imports as of August. This is a notable decline compared to the 10.4% figure seen 2 years earlier. Korea may find it difficult to regain the 10% threshold amid China's ongoing structural reforms to reduce its reliance on trade and focus on the domestic industry instead. Beijing's ongoing economic retaliation over Seoul's deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system may have also contributed to the fall. The UN has imposed a global port ban against 4 ships that violated sanctions against North Korea. Hugh Griffiths, coordinator of a UN Security Council panel on North Korea, said on Monday that it's not an asset freeze or a travel ban. He added the measures went into effect last Thursday, calling them a pretty swift action by the UN committee. According to sources, the vessels in question were carrying coal, seafood, and iron ore, export items banned by the UN resolution in August. Seoul has warned North Korea it cannot restart operations at the Kaesong Joint Industrial Complex as it violates the property rights of South Korean firms which ran factories there. The Unification Ministry issued the statement after North Korean propaganda outlets reported that manufacturing operations had been restarted in Kaesong. A ministry official could not confirm this, but said there were reports of street lights being turned on and bus movements being spotted. The official added the ministry will investigate further and may consider allowing local firms to enter the complex to check on their assets. The complex, located near the inter-Korean border, hosted 124 South Korean firms employing some 54,000 North Korean workers. It was shut down by Seoul in February 2016 following a string of of nuclear missile tests by Pyongyang. And now moving on to our coverage of the markets, we have our Lee Ji-hye on the line with us. Hello, Ji-hye.
Hello, Myung-gil.
So how did the market perform today on the first day of trade after the Chuseok holidays?
Well, local stocks mostly traded higher today, which were boosted by technology stocks as investors displayed optimism over third quarter earnings. The benchmark Kospi gained 1.64% to close at 2,433.81, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq closed 0.27% higher at 654.59. Market bellwether Samsung Electronics jumped 2.96%. While SK Hynix also gained 7% and POSCO also up by 1.74%. Hyundai Motors fell by 0.3%, LG Chem gained 0.26%, and Naver also gained 1.48%. And by sectors on the upward slope were electric appliances and products, which gained by 6.36%, followed by semiconductors and non-ferrous metals, while tobacco, display panels, and games and software were rather on the downward slope.
Right. Can you also tell us what major market events to be looking forward to this week, Ji-hye?
Sure, Myung-gil. For tomorrow on Wednesday, the minutes from the FOMC September meeting will be released. Many indicators, including forecast for the Fed, is signaling towards another 2017 hike and perhaps 3 more in 2018. The Fed has also announced that it would start rolling back its $4.5 trillion balance sheet in October. These notes may help forecasters model the upcoming decisions from the central bank. As for Thursday, the U.S. producer prices for September will be released. Many are calling producer prices unusually soft, with only a 0.2% gain in August, despite the jump in energy prices. Excluding energy and also food, the core rate was even weaker in the previous release, up only 0.1% in August. Such weakness has been tied to the lack of price pressures in trade services. September's consensus forecasts are projecting a rise of 0.4% for the PPI-FD overall. And for Friday, the U.S. Consumer Price Index, also for the month of September, will be released. In August, many are saying the 0.2% gain for core consumer prices was perhaps the most important economic data coming out of the month of August. Though it did not translate into the strength for the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation reading, the core PCE prices, it did foreshadow an outsized September gain and an upward revisions for wages. Year-on-year rates are expected to rise to 2.3% overall.
Right. What can we look forward to this week closer to home, Ji-hye?
Well, Myung-gil, many indicators released this week would be China's exports data on Friday. Local analysts are eyeing this in particular after data showed that South Korea's presence is rather shrinking within the Chinese import market. South Korean products accounted for 9.4% of China's imports in monetary terms for the January-August period for this year, citing deteriorating economic relations between the two countries over the THAAD deployment. At the same time, this does go against statistics showing a trend of rising South Korean exports to China by 2% in the first 8 months of this year, mostly buoyed by semiconductors and petrochemicals, whose exports prices rose nearly 20%. Many are also saying this year's exports, however, would be lower than numbers from 2014 at this current pace. This has been Lee Ji-hye for Business Daily.
Now moving on, the Korean government has reaffirmed its support for domestic firms looking to export nuclear reactors overseas. The move could ease concerns over the effect of Korea's renewable energy drive on the country's nuclear industry. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy met with relevant parties to discuss a strategy for nuclear power projects in Britain, the Czech Republic, and Saudi Arabia. Concerns have been mounting that local firms' ability to compete in the global market could be hampered by President Moon's pledge to phase out nuclear power. The U.S. has pressured Korea to come up with an agreement to revise a Korea-U.S. FTA and announced safeguard measures against Korean-made washing machines. These latest developments could undermine the economic relations between the two countries. Take a look.
The U.S. International Trade Commission announced last week that cheap washing machine imports from Korea and other countries were harming local U.S. firms. U.S. appliance manufacturer Whirlpool had filed a safeguard petition in May against Samsung and LG Electronics. It accused its Korean rivals of moving their assembly lines to Vietnam and Thailand to circumvent U.S. anti-dumping tariffs imposed on their large residential washers. Also last week, Seoul and Washington agreed to begin the process of amending the two countries' free trade agreement at Washington's request. The revision places a heavy focus on the automobile market, which could have a direct impact on Korean automakers. The bad news didn't end there, with the U.S. also ruling that solar panels imported from Korea were also harming domestic firms. For steel products, there are also signs that the U.S. could impose even further anti-dumping duties. This works in favor of U.S. President Donald Trump, who has long vowed to revise or terminate trade deals he sees as unfavorable to American businesses and workers.
And to tell us more about this, Professor JunSok from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. Good to see you again, Professor.
Happy to be here.
The U.S. is taking further safeguard action against Korean solar panels and washing machine imports, and they also plan to hold hearings on the matter. What do you see of this, Professor?
Okay, well, Canada makes a good comparison. The United States is right now renegotiating NAFTA with Canada and Mexico, and they have thrown a lot of anti-dumping and countervailing tariffs against Canada. For example, softwood lumber. They put in something like 27% tariff on imports, even though they delayed implementation on that somewhat. And then they just put up 300% tariff on Bombardier airplanes, which are manufactured in Canada. And the opinion is that the reason that Trump is emphasizing Canada right now is to gain advantage during the NAFTA renegotiations. So even though USTR usually doesn't do this, even though the United States usually don't do this blatantly, I think you have to consider the possibility that the United States wants to soften up Korea for the Korea-U.S. FTA renegotiation. The further evidence for that, perhaps not evidence, but further indication of that, is that, well, in case of solar cells, the solar industry in the United States is $26 billion. And the company Suniva, which filed for safeguard, before they went bankrupt, their revenues were only in the $50 million range before they went bankrupt. So it seems like they're protecting a very small company to the harm of a very large industry. The solar industry is not in favor of putting in the safeguard because if the panel prices go up high, that'll hurt the entire industry since solar panels are the basis for the entire industry. Similarly with washing machines, the Whirlpool, which filed the safeguard suit, said that the safeguard will only increase the U.S. jobs by maybe 1,300. So it's not a big industry, it's not a big case, but I think part of the reason why the United States is emphasizing these safeguards is to soften up Korea for Korea-U.S. renegotiation.
Right, and there are a lot of controversies surrounding the revision to the South Korea-U.S. FTA, with some saying Seoul's government even succumbed to pressure from Washington. How do you assess this, Professor?
Okay, it's, I'm sorry to say that we don't seem to have a lot of leverage here. When President Trump threatened to withdraw from Korea-U.S. FTA, there was a lot of support for Korea because there was a lot of industries in the United States which gained a lot from Korea-U.S. FTA. For example, the agricultural industry. But now that they're not withdrawing and they're renegotiating, they're not quite on the same side anymore. They want to keep the Korea-U.S. FTA, but if they can open Korea's market further or protect their own markets, they're certainly going to want to do that.
Right, now the FTA amendment talks will likely start as soon as January. Could you tell us about the amendment procedures, Professor?
Okay, on the U.S. side, their Trade Promotion Authority Act says that they have to announce the intention to renegotiate 90 days before the renegotiation starts. And then 30 days before, they have to announce to Congress what goals that they will pursue during the negotiation. On the Korean side, we don't have a set time limit, but we have to provide economic report justifying the negotiation, and then report to Congress, National Assembly as well. So there's a lot of procedures to get through, and the USTR has not informed Congress officially their intention to renegotiate the or amend Korea's FTA, so the time clock hasn't started yet. When they announce the renegotiation amendment, then you'll have, on the US side, 90 days, and on Korean side, time it takes to file the report, hold public hearings, and then inform the National Assembly.
Right. And now we're hearing from sources that the revision will not be partial, but a full revision. How likely is this, Professor?
Okay, well, before the first meeting, USTR Lighthizer said that he's not interested in withdrawal or renegotiating the entire agreement. Amendment usually means that they'll fix parts of the agreement. Now, the Korea's FTA mentions amendments and modifications. Modifications are changes in little detail that doesn't really require U.S. congressional approval, but the interpretation is that amendments will require U.S. congressional approval. So it'll be somewhat major, but it will not involve the entire agreement.
Right. Now, once the revision talks start, like as you mentioned, automobiles and steel products will likely be on the table for discussion. Now, what does the South Korean government need to do in order to minimize the damage to our industries, Professor?
Okay, I think so far the Korean government has been emphasizing the win-win aspect of Korea's FTA, the usual trade gains to both countries. I'm not sure if that's working with President Trump's administration. I think President Trump is a more aggressive negotiator, so he wants to take as much of that gain as possible. So this is not a gentlemanly negotiation trying to divide up the spoils. It's one side trying to take as much spoils as they can. Given that situation and given what has worked so far, I think instead of Korea saying, relying on academics and relying on logic to show that the agreement is mutually beneficial, I think they have to rely more on the American partners, the American retailers who sell Korean goods, the American congressmen whose districts have Korean investments, and use them to make the point that this is good for the United States. I think when Korea says that this is good for the United States, it will not convince President Trump. It will not have that much of a political leverage. But if it's the Americans who are saying that, I think that President Trump's administration will have to take that more seriously.
Well, I guess protecting national interests will be the top priority for both governments during the amendment negotiations. Thank you for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
This year's Chuseok break has been unusually long thanks to 2 national holidays and 2 weekends coming before and after Korea's Thanksgiving Day. Retailers have taken the opportunity to try and cash in on the 10-day long golden holiday period. Our Kim Hae-sung reports.
Large retailers in Korea posted solid sales during this year's Chuseok holiday, which was marked by various discount and promotion events, including the annual Korea Sales Festa. Lotte department store said sales between September 30th and October 7th surged more than 23% compared to the same period last year, with sales of Chuseok gift sets up nearly 4%. Processed food and daily necessities accounted for nearly 10% of the gift packages sold, and high-end gifts priced at over $870 also flew off the store shelves quickly. Another department store, 신세계, saw sales increase by more than 10% during the holiday, with men's fashion items and sports goods soaring more than 30%.
Customers planning to go for outdoor trips visited our store, leading to an increase in sales of women and men's sport fashion goods, boosting our overall sales.
Thanks to the long break, the number of Incheon Airport passengers hit a record high this year, leading to an increase in local spending in duty-free shops. While China also enjoyed an 8-day golden holiday week, spending by Chinese tourists in Korean duty-free shops dropped over Beijing's THAAD retaliations.
The number of Chinese tourists coming to Korea plummeted this year, and sales among Chinese fell more than 25% during JunSok.
Both Lotte duty-free and Shilla duty-free saw an overall sales drop of 15% and 10% respectively over the JunSok holiday period. Kim Hae-sung, Business Daily.
Ex-Tebel affiliated firms will now be subject to tighter scrutiny to promote independent governance from its former parent companies. The Fair Trade Commission will require the firms to regularly submit transaction records for a certain period of time to prevent unfair trade practices. Current restrictions prevent a parent company from owning a stake larger than 3% in the affiliated firm. In a survey of 48 companies that had separated from 4 major conglomerates, 23 of them had conducted more than half of their transactions with their former branch affiliates. In addition, the FTC plans to create separation requirements for directors and executives for a company to be considered truly independent. The number of local companies that declared bankruptcy last year rose to the highest level in 4 years as they struggled to make ends meet. Our Lee Ji-young has more.
Hanjin Shipping's bankruptcy declared early this year may have been just the tip of the iceberg, with hundreds of other smaller companies also suffering a similar fate and shutting down their businesses. In fact, the total number of company insolvencies in 2016 reached the highest level in 4 years. According to the Supreme Court of Korea, 740 firms filed for bankruptcy last year, after rising steadily from the 396 in 2012. Despite stellar earnings posted by several big export-oriented firms, difficulties faced by small businesses are becoming increasingly evident, with so-called zombie firms now on the rise. Some experts don't necessarily consider this a negative phenomenon, as the rise in corporate bankruptcies reflect changing business environments. But others still say that there needs to be a shift in certain policies that can help these smaller firms expand their businesses beyond Korea's borders. Cases filed for personal bankruptcies, on the other hand, are trending in the opposite direction, hitting about 50,000 in 2016 as individuals further tighten their purse strings. This also led to a big drop in the number of forced auctions as a result of bankruptcies, hitting the lowest since 2007. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
At least 7 iPhone 8 and 8 Plus models have been reported to have swollen batteries, splitting the phones and making them unusable. Reports of such cases have come out of Taiwan, China, Japan, Canada, and other nations, indicating the issue is not isolated to a specific region that may have received faulty handsets. In a statement, Apple said it was aware of the reports and was looking into what might have caused the defect. It is yet to be seen if the problem is similar to that of Samsung's Note 7 last year, which led to the phone being recalled and discontinued. Richard Thaler has won this year's Nobel Prize in Economics. The American professor from the University of Chicago earned the honors for his contributions to behavioral economics. Our Noaram has more.
The Nobel Committee said Dr. Thaler's work helped improve understanding of how people think and behave when making economic decisions. He is the co-author of the best-selling book Nudge, based on a theory from behavioral economics and used to tackle many of society's major problems, for example, encouraging smokers to become vapors. It champions the notion that people can be influenced by prompts, such as changing the wording of tax demands, to alter their behavior. His career spans 4 decades, and his research has touched on subjects ranging from asset prices, personal savings to property crime. Thaler described how he was notified of the news.
My cell phone rang at 4 in the morning, and it said Sweden on the phone, so I had a pretty good idea what that might be. I'm happy that it happened and that, I'm young enough to enjoy it.
The award for economics is not among the Nobel Foundation's official prizes, but was established separately by Sweden's central bank in memory of Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel. Noah Adam, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more of the day's top business stories, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.